Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at IronHack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Well, hello, Engagers. Welcome back to another episode with the Professor Game podcast. And we are here today with Orin. But Orin, before we kick off, are you prepared to engage?
I am.
Let's do this because we are today with Orin Davis. I hope I'm pronouncing this decently, who earned the first doctorate in positive psychology and is a self-actualization engineer who enables people to do their best. He consults for companies from startups to multinationals on hiring strategies, culture, innovation, diversity, equity, inclusion, and employee well-being, and coaches people at all levels on building self-knowledge and developing personal growth trajectories. And as a principal investigator of the Quality of Life Laboratory, he conducts research on flow, creativity, hypnosis, and mentoring. He is also serving as a professor of creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, business, and psychology at SUNY Buffalo State College and gives workshops and lectures globally about human capital, creativity, and innovation, and of course, positive psychology. He's also a startup advisor who helps early-stage companies enhance their value propositions, pitches, cultures, and human capital. And he writes and speaks avidly about human capital, creativity and innovation, and positive psychology. So you can see there's a trend on all the topics that he is consulting, teaching, writing, speaking, and advising about. Orin, is there anything that we're missing from that intro?
No, I think that covers it. I like having fun and doing a wide range of things.
It sounds like it from all the stuff that you're doing. And from all that stuff that you're doing, actually, what would you say a regular day with you looks like? What does it feel like? Let's take today, tomorrow, yesterday, last week, I don't know, wherever you want to take us.
I think half the fun is that I don't have a regular day. And I'm not sure what normal would even look like for me because, everything, I'm doing so many different things and I wear a lot of different hats. And I think that allows me to embrace a lot of different challenges in the kind of work that I do.
Interesting. So let's take, your regular work and the kinds of things that you're doing. We just want to have a sneak peek into what your work in general looks like, because I know you do many, many things from your intro.
Sure. So I kind of break it down into 4 silos: research, writing, teaching, consulting. So those are really the 4 areas that I'm working on. So on a given day, I'm probably doing some combination of those just across the board.
Fantastic. So let's get right into story mode then. And we always sort of start strong in this one because we like to learn from past experience from our guests. And we would like you to tell us a story of what you maybe call your favorite fail or first attempt in learning, that failure moment when, doing something, especially if it has to do with gaming, gamification, motivation, human motivation, and, how you went about this, what were those lessons learned and what can we take away?
So I think the first thing is I've tried designing a couple games, but a lot of times I just work with game designers. And a lot of what we're trying to come up with is, what's going to make the game interesting and funny. And sometimes, you're trying for that, but you don't think about the replay value of the game. So one of the games that I was working on, it was a game that was a lot of fun. It worked very well, but it wasn't the kind of game you could play repeatedly. And so, you played it through once and then you never wanted to touch it again because you've seen everything it has.
That is a big problem, right? Because then, the replayability is something that could be significant, unless maybe sometimes you're talking about some learning games are like one and done. But in general, replayability is something that you're usually striving for, right?
Yeah, I want to make something that lasts. I want to make something sustainable. So constantly, I'm designing systems, and when you think of the work of a professor, also, in a very real sense, you want to apply some of the gaming principles to teaching and to running a class, Because after all, students are always trying to get, the maximum grade for the minimum effort, and the professors are trying to get the best education across, while, working through the parameters that come with teaching and all the various constraints, time issues, student challenges, things along those lines. So you're actually having to design a point system there too, and you have to think about like what is the purpose of the point system and what's the purpose of grades, and how people are going to navigate this. And I actually spend a lot of time, funnily enough, I think that's the game I'm designing most often these days.
And do you do something like different? Because I know that, there's plenty of discussions going around, how is education working? What's the grading? What about tests? Like, is there anything that you're doing different these days?
Yes. One major thing that I started doing, because I found that students were approaching my classes and college in general with multiple purposes. So one of the things that I invented recently is a dual grade system where I'm giving students 2 grades. One is basically there to, give them an idea of how well they're doing relative to how well they expect to be doing. Like what are they used to? What is the standard? The system of standards that they're used to? And how are they doing relative to that? But then also, because I consult in the real world, because I, keep one foot, in the business world, I do want them to know what level of skill they have relative to what the world is going to expect them to be able to do when they graduate. So I set up the assignments, the entire syllabus, the system that I have, so that they're able to get feedback 2 ways. One is, here's how you're doing for a college student, but then also, here's how you're doing if you want to go tell people on a resume or during an interview, I took this class and I learned this material. Here's how well you actually do compared to what they are going to expect.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Is there any advice that you could give people on how to achieve this?
Yeah, actually do the work.
Fantastic. That is very good, especially in a world where there's plenty of academics that are, doing a great academic work, but not all of them have time, call it as you will, to do also some work outside in sort of the industry as well. And that is a very interesting point and perspective as well. So I completely agree. Like in my case, I don't do the research and academic part, but I do teach. And I'm definitely into the weeds of everything that is getting done professionally. And that helps quite a bit give some perspective. A good thing about some of the things I'm teaching is I don't have the standard part because I'm teaching something that is entirely new and there's no standard for it. When I teach, how to design or how to do gamification, there's not too much to take from that. So I basically do not everything exactly the way I would like it, but I don't have to stick to so many standards. So I do have that kind of advantage in many ways, which makes me very, very happy.
True as that is, actually, the students expect a certain amount of workload and a certain amount of effort that they need to put in and a certain degree of accountability. So you still have to deal with that even when you're able to make your own class. Because, for example, if your class is a lot harder than all the other ones that they're taking, then it's going to be a bit of an issue. If you've got much stricter accountability standards, or if your grading standards are higher, or if your workload is significantly higher, even if you think it's a legit workload, if that's not what they're used to, the students are going to have challenges on that. So it was those experiences that actually led me to invent the dual grade system.
Very, very interesting. Very good. So let's go actually and take a shift on the previous formal question that we had about failure, and actually go for a time when you actually experience success. Again, it could be on the first attempt, the nth attempt, or whatever that looks like. We would like to go through one of those stories and be there at the ground level with you, see what that looked like, and maybe some lessons you took away. Maybe, I don't know, if you have something that you would, or a few things that you would attribute that success to.
So I think the biggest part of the success, first of all, was just prototype, because you're going to keep on trying it. And the more that you play it, the more that you test it, the more that you try it, the more you're able to see the different exceptions to the rules and systems that you've made. So, when I'm trying to create, let's say, a reward system or some kind of, let's say, point system or incentive system, you have to sort of see where the exception's going to be. And so you keep on experimenting, you keep on testing, and there's no such thing as success on this so much as viable. And then you make it more viable, and then more faults are going to come up, and you make it even more viable, and you keep on developing the system. And so it's funny when you ask me if it's success. I don't think of anything that I've pulled off as so much a success, so much as, okay, well, this works anyway, and people are using it, and it's working well.
Absolutely. Do you have, I don't know, maybe an example you can run us through of, as you were saying, like prototype 1, 2, 3, 4, and prototype? Like how does that go? Like maybe a real life example of how that worked. Of course, something that you can't disclose. So
I grew up with a video game designer. And so he often would make games I would often beta test. But something that we also, both developed, kind of together was a sort of neighborhood sport, which, we put together, just something that we could play in the street. And it ended up being a really weird combination of sports. And as we start playing, we start to figure out, where should we put the boundaries? How long should our quote unquote court be? How do we do it with the different boundaries, both on the ground and in the air? How high should things be? And, part of that is, as we're formalizing the rules, we continue to play the game. We started with, very little, but then as we started to keep playing, we started to see like what was reasonable, what was not reasonable. Is the game played with 2 people? Is the game played with 4 people? How do you play with 2? How do you play with 4? What are the differences? What are the strategies? Are there ways in which people could game the system? So we were playing with a disc, and we were trying to. It was sort of a weird combination of like hockey and disc, and like trying to get the disc across certain lines and within certain parameters. So I guess it was a weird combination of disc golf and hockey. But what exactly are the rules? When we found that the disc was going in different directions, if the disc went, outside of the field, let's say in the air, was that legit? If it went out, if it hit the ground outside, obviously that's out of bounds. But what about if it, curves in the air? Discs curve in the air. So how do you do with curvature in the air? If the disc goes way too high in the field, where do you put the out of bounds height for a goalpost? So things along those lines. Dealing with ricochets. What if you have extra players? How do you put those in, and so on?
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Like going through each of these different things and approaching them as each of them and testing out what it looks like seems to have been a winning approach for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking, the first time we tried a 4-player version, all players were allowed to use their hands, and we realized that just made the game ridiculous. Nobody could do anything. So we started changing the rules of like who could use their hands, who couldn't use their hands. And, this collaborative process was probably the best part. The fact that we were, it ended up being 4 of us collaborating on this. I don't think I was the person who initially, invented the core of the game, but, working with everybody else to build this up and, feeling like you're a contributor, and then also, making suggestions, going back and forth, getting consensus, and, trying different things, and let's see how this works. It ultimately got us to a really fun version of this that we were playing on a weekly basis.
Sounds pretty nice. Very, very neat. So thank you for that experience as well. And again, I think you would, as you were saying, you would probably attribute that success precisely to prototyping, right?
Absolutely. and being willing to just, experiment around and try something crazy just to see how it works, and, being willing to get that feedback of like, okay, how is this feeling? How is that working? Does this make sense? And kind of wait for the exceptions to show themselves in addition to looking for where things could go weird.
Very, very good. And talking about this prototyping process in general, if you were to approach, perhaps, as you were saying, in your role, of course, the creation of a game and your involvement, and perhaps, how the game designer is involved as well, what would you say is maybe a general process, or I don't know if to call them steps or not, like how does that happen when you're creating a game? What are, things you look at? How does it start? When do you know, this is a good prototype that is good enough to be shown to other people? I don't know, like give us some feedback on that one.
I think what I'm mostly looking for is trying to get into the mind of the player. What do they want? And what are they hoping to get out of this experience? And I think that until I understand the player and I understand their motivations, and then I understand my own motivations for creating the game, like what experience do I want them to get? What experience do they want to get? What motivations do they have? And I think looking for the harmony of those motivations is the first thing that I've got to do before I can make anything. And then, once I think I've got at least some picture of that, then I start designing incentives. Like, here are the outcomes that I want. Here are the outcomes that I think the player wants. How do I create incentives for the player to go towards the outcomes that I want them to achieve, as the designer, but then also think about the feedback and the things that they're going to get from those outcomes. And once I've designed those incentives, then I want to start creating a structure. But to me, I think the incentives come before the structure of the game. And then I can think about, let's say, how they're going to achieve sub-goals and how they're going to get rewarded, and are the rewards going to be good enough, and are they going to be rewards that they want, are they rewards that I want to see them get? And then from there, you build your first prototype, and you know right away that your prototype is not going to be that good, and that's okay. You just want to get something down on paper or wireframed or whatever it is. You want to get something in there. And then you want to start thinking through the different possibilities of experience. You want to sort of do some user mapping here. And once you got this thing on paper, start creating personas and user maps. And it's like, okay, now this player, who may have these motivations and these skills is going to try to navigate the game this way, I think. What are they going to run into? And you start, running through how the game is going to be, start to finish, what's going to happen. And you keep doing that for various user profiles. You start to notice exceptions. You start to notice things that might work, things that will not work. And as you go through these user profiles, you start to create some additional parameters to the game. Sometimes you find that you have to scrap a whole bunch of things, go back to the drawing board. But once you've created a variety of user profiles, and I think I want more than one. After you've gone through a variety of user profiles, you now have something reasonable, and you've got a much broader scope and different paths that can be taken. And from this, you actually start to construct the full game and the parameters, and then you start the user testing and adjust accordingly.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Thank you for sort of opening up your mind and your process to the engagers today. And thank you very much for giving us those insights.
Just a quick break before we continue with this episode. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I would really appreciate if you share it with your friends and family and on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's @RobAlvarezB and the hashtag ProfessorGame, all one word. And in Facebook, you can find the Professor Game page. Thanks in advance for your engagement.
And Orin, what would you say is something that any game design project or anything that you're creating again with that team? What would be a best practice that, almost all these types of projects would perhaps benefit from or be better thanks to that?
So I think a lot of it is looking for places where players can be intrinsically motivated to play, number one. And number two, a game that they can adjust the challenge level themselves relative to their skills. So I like making situations where people can choose their own difficulty level that could be commensurate with the skill level that they want to bring at that time. And I think that's one of the best ways to do it. And I think that some of the best games I've played and some of the best games I've seen, I found that was always the best part. I could adjust the challenge level to whatever skill level I want to bring. And when I see people getting engaged in games and people talking about games and the games that get listed is really awesome, it can be played at any number of levels. And what I think is really cool is like the multiplayer games where you can sort of put in some handicaps or create handicaps, even artificial ones. Like, I'm not going to play with these power-ups, let's say, or I'll let you get these power-ups so that, I can play a harder version of the game. And being able to really customize that challenge skill balance is probably one of the most important things of all. And then again, looking at the motivations of the player, like why does the player want to play this game? And think about what the player is actually playing this game for. And, people don't always think about like what are the motivations of a player and what they're really going for. Sometimes it's to relax, for instance. Sometimes it's to challenge oneself. Sometimes it's for achievement. Sometimes it's, for various intellectual processes and benefits. And I also do want to point out that game can be writ large. So, we're not necessarily just talking about a board game or a video game, but also, let's say, a life game, or when, we see, companies are talking about gamification of achievements in the workplace or in learning, and we're seeing, ways of gamifying education. People are talking about badges. You look on Coursera, for instance, and you could argue that Coursera, in a very real sense, is a game, much like Duolingo.
Interesting. Thank you very much. That is absolutely fantastic. And yes, in many ways, and I've said this before as well, even, education itself is a game. You can argue it's a well-designed game or a not very well-designed game, but there's many instances, and life in general could be considered a game. So completely agree with that final statement as well. Thank you for that, Orin. And talking about recommendations, because you just gave us quite a few and very interesting ones as well. Would you, like, after hearing this, getting a sense of the questions in this podcast and how the vibe goes, is there somebody that comes to your mind that you would say, oh, I'd really like to listen to this person being interviewed in an interview like this one on Professor Game?
I'd love to hear Daniel Remar get interviewed.
Daniel, what? I didn't catch the last name?
I think it's Remar. I don't know how his last name is pronounced, but he's an indie developer, and he's made some amazing games.
Sounds like a fantastic profile, especially when indie developers are there. There's plenty of times and plenty of occasions when, the indie developer has to do everything. So you can get insights from all throughout the process and all of the different instances and all the different things that development of a game requires. So it sounds like a very good one.
Also, I found that he's really good with, good game concept and design. He makes very enjoyable games. I think of one of them in particular where the graphics aren't that great, and the sound's all right. And, he's clearly got a good ear for music and such. But the mechanics of the game, the play, the modalities of the game can be played in so many different ways, and he creates different achievements that are, some are easier, some are harder, and it's got insane replay value and just incredibly fun, even though it's, it looks like it's almost an 8-bit game.
And that's okay. There's also, the whole retro movement too.
Yeah. So you go on, I think it's remar.se, and you just see all these neat games. There's one that's even like black and white. And just, you never think that something with such simple graphics, it's kind of like, V6 Times, is a game with, incredibly simple graphics, but wow, what a game.
There you go. And in that same sense of recommendations, is there a book that you recommend us to read?
Sure. I would very much recommend reading Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and I'm going to spell that because it's hard to pick out. It's Csikszentmihalyi. And his book on flow, one of the things that a lot of people study is how to experience flow while gaming. And funnily enough, a lot of researchers who research flow, one of the first things we do is we let people play video games and we analyze their game playing experience. Tetris, for example, is a very commonly used game in flow research.
Actually, very, very good book for sure. In fact, engagers, if you didn't catch the spelling there, you can go to professorgame.com. If you go to you click on the search bar, click Orin, you will find the show notes for this very episode. And we will be linking the book Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi for sure. And I hope I didn't butcher the name too much. It's not an easy one to pronounce, especially when you're reading it. You see the way it's written. It's not very intuitive for English or even Spanish speakers like myself.
Yeah, I had to work at it because I'm a native English speaker. But since he was my advisor, I kind of needed to learn how to pronounce it.
Oh wow, very, very nice, very nice. So there you go. And talking about those recommendations, instead of going for other people and other people's books, what would you say is something that you do at least better than most other people? That thing that maybe some of us would call your superpower.
I'll tell you what people say back to me about it. There are two things that people feedback to me. One is that I can see a complex system in things. So like even when like I can see how the system works and I can see how pieces fit together, even if it's a complex system. The other thing that people tell me I'm very good at is breaking things down to first principles. So going down to like the very first principles of things, what is the foundation of what we're doing, and then build it up from there. And that's probably why when I think about game design, I'm really thinking about the motivations of people. Like, why do people do what they do? So why are people going to play this game, and why do I want to make this game? To start there and build everything just from there.
Sounds like a very, very useful superpower in this world, in the professional world in general. Very, very interesting. And thank you for sharing that as well. And Orin, we're almost running out of time, but there are a couple of questions that we need to make. And this one is going to be a very difficult one, at least from the feedback of our previous guests. What would you say is your favorite game?
Oh, that's not fair. Man, I have so many that I love. Yeah, there are just a bunch of different games that I return to, but I think, all right, I'm going to cheat a little bit and pick a series. But I'm going to have to pick two. But I'm going to first of all, for platformers, I got to go with the Mega Man series. I could play that. My gosh, I think the number of hours I've spent playing Mega Man is a 4 or 5 digit number. It's just an amazing game, and I love it. And I can play through that series all the time. But also Final Fantasy, I really love. It is especially the games that are more customizable. So Final Fantasy 5, 6, and 7, which have incredible levels of customization. So I can adjust the challenge levels, any way I like, and play it in a whole lot of different ways. And I gotta also give honorable mention to Slay the Spire, which is also just an amazing game with a very customizable game with a lot of different opportunities, the different ascension levels, and ways of customizing the game, the challenge, things along those lines as well.
So it sounds like, except for Mega Man, you're a big customizer, right?
Well, even with Mega Man, I actually do some weird customizations of my own when I play. So let's say, trying to beat the game using only, one particular special weapon, like go get that special weapon right away and then try and beat the game using only that weapon, or like, only 2, or, just putting in extra parameters and handicaps to the greatest extent possible.
There you go. A customizer himself, Orin. Fantastic stuff. So is there any final piece of advice you want to leave the engagers with? Of course, let us know where we can find out more about you, about your work, before we say that, at least for today, it's game over.
Sure. I think the main piece of advice that I would give is that it's totally okay to make something that's already out there and put your own twist on it. There's an old saying, good artists copy, great artists steal. And I think that people should feel comfortable doing that, because you will eventually put your own twist on it. And when you get ready to put your own twist on it, feel free to stamp your identity on that part and on the twist that really is who you are and what you're about. And for those who want to track me online, I run the Quality of Life Lab. That's QLLAB.org. And you can take a look at some of my research on flow, creativity, and innovation. And always love to chat with people about academic work on flow and mentoring and creativity, things along those lines. So lots of good times out there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Orin Davis, for joining with the Engagers today, for all that wisdom, all that experience that you have, and that you've shared especially. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, Engagers, it is fantastic to have you here. And this podcast, as you know, makes sense with you, so let's go ahead and connect, for example, on Twitter. So you can let me know who you would like to know as a guest, future guest, repeat guest maybe, what questions you have. Maybe there's a question that I'm not asking regularly on the podcast that you would like incorporated, or, what we can help you with. What are those needs that you have that we might be helping you with? You can find my Twitter account on professorgame.com/Twitter. And I'm always sharing content on gamification on the podcast, especially around education, as you know. And before you click continue, before you move on, remember, please go ahead and if you haven't already, subscribe or follow for free using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.